in this situation, they're not cheating.
Right. Which is the problem. The reason I have Adam on is because I did a video on California Prop 22, which is a bill that has been proposed by a lot of the rideshare companies. And it has to do with trying to get protections so that they don't have to follow Assembly Bill 5, which there was a lot of controversy around, and that had to do with their ability to label their employees as independent contractors versus employees. So they're workers, my mistake. And basically, we had a little bit of a back and forth because he was, forward enough to leave a comment that was very well thought out, very polite, and just it was very obvious that it was in good faith. And he was saying, I see where you're coming from, but I have a different perspective on this, and I want to share that with you. And so then I said to him, it's like, hey, come on, because I need that perspective. I don't have it, and that's the whole point, is I want people. And so if you're someone that has the same issue, whether any type of job, if you have a specific viewpoint that I don't have, I would love to have you on, because that's the goal, is us to talk and share ideas as workers so that we're able to have a better understanding of what everyone's going through, and consider that when we go to understand different policies and things in the world around us. And so what I wanted to then ask Adam was, what is your view of Prop 22? And then we'll have a little bit of a back and forth.
Sure. So, from being a non-Californian, seeing it, my understanding is the proposition is obviously in response to AB5, right? To classify drivers as, or independent contractors across the spectrum of work, right?
Correct.
As employees of said whatever company, right? And they have to pass the 3-pronged test of whether they're an employee or not.
And I'm going to put that up on the screen for everyone so they can see it. Continue.
And that piece, I don't really have a lot to say about that part, just because I can't really argue with the test that you want to put forth. I think the part that I speak to is whether you were to do it part-time or full-time, with this type of work, having control of your time is the most valuable piece. So anything that removes that ability, which I don't know many employees who have complete control of their time, other than they may think they do, but their boss or someone had to agree that that schedule that they want is okay. For me, losing that hurts more drivers than anything, because to structure that to make someone an employee versus an independent contractor, that by itself just ruins it all. And so I guess that's my perspective, not knowing all the details and inner workings of California, but just from an outside looking in, I'm like, me giving up my time. And I think that's just because that's my life philosophy at this point. Give me control of my time, I can control my outcomes. So giving up my time, I'm not willing to do that. So I think that's what caused me to respond and give feedback, for sure.
Yeah. And I want to, just so everyone's clear, Assembly Bill 5, essentially what ended up happening is that they made a 3-pronged test is the change that they made. And basically it was intentionally made to target these companies, these rideshare companies, because there's uproar that they haven't been paying enough in taxes, because essentially the main difference the government has in what their incentive is for going after this is that these companies, because they have they're independent contractors, not employees, they don't pay the Social Security, they don't pay the Social Security disability insurance, and they don't pay the unemployment insurance. That's the issue. And so the government is looking at this as, okay, well, if we can get them to pay that insurance, then that ends up giving more funds for people that are unemployed, which will help the unemployment problem specifically in California.
Sure.
I don't think that Assembly Bill 5 was good to begin with. I think that it's not a good enough test. I'm not offering a prescription for it either. But I think that it ended up being a real problem. And that's why you saw a lot of other independent contractors that aren't ride shares, like artists, videographers, and so on, have pushed back on it, and they've already put in different restrictions on who it is going after. And so it's a patchwork bill. It's a band-aid to try and fix a problem that isn't really effective. That being said, especially talking to Adam, I agree that I don't think that Assembly Bill 5 is good. I think that, yes, there needs to be something done to fix that problem, because it does end up hurting drivers in the current way, in the current market. However, I still think that the issue with the Prop 22, and the reason I would still personally vote no on it, is the specific people that wrote it and the stipulations that they put in it. And what I mean is that the first thing is the stipulation that they put that to me is just over the top, that I didn't hammer enough in my first video, is that to repeal this, if it passes, they need a 7/8 majority across the entire California legislature in order to repeal it, which is unheard of. And in my opinion, that is a little bit too much. I think that in a perfect world, if I had to paint it, in a perfect world, I would not want my boss writing the law that I have to follow, just because I kind of want a little bit of a third party involved to make sure that we're all good. And so in a perfect world, what I would love to see is, rideshare employees get a seat at the table, and I say employees not as a slight of employee versus independent contractor. So I'm going to say workers from here on out. Rideshare workers, just so we're not confused. I would like to see rideshare workers have a say in, like, what are the terms of this? Because I have seen that, I think it's like 80% of rideshare employees are okay with Prop 22 in the state of California. I think the issue is the balance of power, and I think also and this could just be me being a prick, but just on principle, the fact that they've spent more money on this bill to try and pass it than any other bill in the state of California's history, that looks really bad. And I don't think we should, generally speaking, I think that money in politics, everyone kind of agrees that that's a problem, and
Sure.
we shouldn't reward them for that. That being said, Assembly Bill 5 definitely needs a lot of work fixed on it, because it does screw over a lot of people, no question.
Sure.
Yeah, no, and I don't have a full answer. What I would like to say, but this could just be me living in fantasy land. So, what I would like to say is that, if you're getting paid, by the mile and, by, the time, then technically speaking, if they were a, good company, and they wanted to do the best by you and not worry about their interest as much, then they would, wouldn't have a problem with you making your own hours still. But I think, yes, you and I both know that pragmatically that will not happen. Yeah, it's a dicey situation. Yeah. And the main problem I have with it is when you look, I think it's great for people to be able to do, have their time, which is really valuable.
Sure.
The big problem is, and this is coming from a UPS employee, back I worked at UPS for about 5 years, and I'm 27. So most of my working career was there.
Sure.
And I know that when you look as an example at like FedEx versus UPS versus Amazon Flex being independent contractors, FedEx being a non-unionized version, and UPS being a very heavily unionized company, the value that you're able to get for your labor between those three is stark. When you're talking about UPS, like, essentially, if I was loading trucks, right, in college, I was able to make around $30,000 a year. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's pretty great for no degree.
For a college student.
And yeah, exactly. And granted, I was working full time, don't get me wrong, but and then when you look at driver's pay, like I think the median driver pay for UPS is like $60,000 a year, and that's without a college degree and without a CDL. So no special licensing. And then on top of that, you have better benefits than my dad in the Marine Corps had. Um, it's insane. That being said, I understand that not every job is going to be the same. But when you look at the comparison and you see FedEx, where the average driver makes between 30 and 40,000 per year, and then Amazon Flex, which is the independent contractor version, even less than that, and they aren't allowed to unionize, I am seeing that as the common business practice across industries, rideshare included, where companies see, okay, if we can push independent contractors more and more, then we're able to essentially alienate employees and keep them from unionizing, which will, it'll help some people. Don't get me wrong. It'll help some
Hmm.
people because some people are going to be smarter and able to play the system and able to make make it work for them like you've been doing, which is amazing. And I applaud you. The issue you have is that is going to lower the wages across the industry because, like, if say in the example of Amazon and UPS, currently Amazon heavily relies on UPS and the USPS for their shipping because they don't have the infrastructure to do all of the logistics work.
Hmm.
But if they were able to get to a point where they didn't need those third parties, then they would end up having a much stronger monopoly on that section of the market. And of course, that will then lower wages because they have more of the business in that area, which if they're running on lower costs than UPS is for doing the same thing, then they're going to be pushing UPS out of business. And that is going to essentially end up eroding either benefits, pay, employment at that company that then can't compete. And so the problem is that when the government doesn't do something to make it an even playing field as far as how companies are able to compete, then you have, there's going to be some inequality in the market that's unfair as far as like who's playing
Sure.
by the rules because they're playing by different rules.
Sure.
That's the main problem. So I'll let you talk in 1 second. I apologize.
No,
I've
you're
gone
okay.
very long.
You're okay.
But yeah, so that's why I think, generally speaking, that I still think that no on 22 makes the most sense, but I do think we need to do a serious discussion about Assembly Bill 5 and look at how to make it better because, yeah, it is going to hose a lot of independent contractors in the short term. No question.
I guess I wonder, like I, in politics is politics,
Right,
and
right.
I feel like
We all have biases.
most of this is like most of this is driven by that, right? Like all of this is being pushed by politics. Don't get me wrong. Is Uber or Lyft and rideshare and independent contract work in this particular industry perfect? By no means, no. However, the I guess I have a question. My question would be, I don't really know about the Amazon Flex
No, of course.
model.
I was just wanting to
Are,
give that's I'm ignorant outside of talking to you and other, anecdotal experiences. So that's just
sure,
my here's my reasoning for having this skepticism.
sure.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, are Amazon Flex, are most of their drivers full time, part time? Since they're independent contractors, do they get to make their schedules as well, or how does that work?
I'm not sure. So they do get to make their schedules. I'm not sure about whether most are full time or part time. They do make their schedules though. And
Because
basically
that's
they get paid more. So we had a lot of people that would leave UPS
hmm.
loading jobs to go get Amazon Flex jobs because they would
Hmm.
make more than they would make more driving there than they would loading, and because UPS it's a lot harder to get those driver jobs because they're amazing jobs and nobody leaves
Sure,
them until they retire. So
sure.
the difference in pay would be, say you'd make 13 or something like that loading, then you could go there and make like 16, and so it was worth it for their time. But I don't know as far as like how many are full and how many are part.
So that's kind of the thing. Even if we just look at the rideshare business, right? When we use numbers and I look at the studies and averages, those numbers are only so good, right? Because an average is just taking a big swath and dividing it by the number of people, right? Like that
Agreed.
are in that swath. So I mean, it doesn't truly reflect what's happening because in that average, if you have full time people who are actually doing it, right? Like if somebody's driving this full time, and I go back to your independent contractor, so you make your own schedule, right? if you're driving this and relying on this for your full-time income, if it's not enough money, go do something else. Like
I agree.
it is it's one of those things where it's like staying in it because I, I don't know, like staying in it for what reason? If it doesn't meet your financial needs, why are you doing it, right?
I 100% agree with you. Yes.
And I think if you talk to most drivers who do it full time, the reason they still do it is because it it meets their financial needs. Like at the end of the day, we ask anyone, why do you work? Yes, you might enjoy what you do. You might be passionate about it. Unless you're already independently wealthy. If I asked you, if I stopped paying you, would you still do it? You would probably say no, because I can't.
Right.
Right.
Maslow's
So
hierarchy. Yep.
we're all working because we want to receive compensation for our skills, our talents, our work. So if the people who are driving specifically full time or even part time, if it doesn't make sense to you, why are you doing it? Right. So like force Uber has employees, right? Like they have, I don't know, 15, 20,000. Don't quote me on that number. Tens of thousands of employees around the world, right? And that's in their back of the house handling the infrastructure business. Don't get me wrong, without drivers, you couldn't do any of this. I get it. However, how we're able to control our time and we have the tools we need to be successful. The even if they were to switch it, right? If they were to switch and make all drivers employees for the sake of being able to get benefits and all those things that matter, what does it really do? You know, like because it will hurt drivers' pay more than time and pay more than anything else. Because a bad day for me, a really bad day for me, and I don't drive for an hourly rate. I drive for let me drive to reach my goals. But a bad day for me is $20 an hour. So unless we're about to enact a $20 an hour minimum wage, which I would not want, because that is a horrible day, trading that for I don't some other benefit financially just doesn't make any sense for the average driver. You know what I mean? Even when you back out costs and expenses, a bad day you're still looking at 17 on a really bad day. On an average day, you're looking at more like 28, 30,
Yeah.
backing out expenses, 25.
Which
So
at that rate, that's amazing. That's awesome.
so so I mean, like I went to go. Looks like I have exact numbers of just taking a snapshot of 5 weeks, just in the average, just for people who work on hourly rate and that kind of thing. 29.93. So we can back out, and in none of those weeks did I work 40 hours. On average, I worked 34 hours. So even if you back out expenses, depreciation isn't a consideration for me because I'm writing all of that off in my taxes, my mileage. So go find a job where you can, in the U.S., any city, any state, where you can control your time and after expenses and gas, make $25 an hour. I don't know that it exists. You know what I mean? So jeopardizing
Oh,
that
I
for
100% agree with you. Yeah.
like jeopardizing that for I don't know what is worth jeopardizing that. Like just pure numbers wise, I don't know anything that's worth that because even if I'm not sure what the people say they want benefits or paid days off or I don't know, like all of those things you can create. Like I can get insurance through Uber if I wanted. I can go straight through a partner we have and get insurance, just like anyone at their job who offers insurance can do. I
Right.
can do that.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And I was
yeah,
wondering, because I've heard people talk about that, mostly in California. So not, I'm sure the prices are completely different. But
sure.
assuming that you know the answer to this, if you do get insurance through Uber, like how is it? Like deduct, what are we looking at? Like payment, deductible, things like that, or who is it through?
So they partner with a company called Stride.
Okay.
So I personally, this is a whole nother philosophical conversation, but I personally believe in like insuring myself. Like I'm a relatively young guy, right? In the grand scheme of my life and living, relatively healthy, right? So I try to put money away to cover expenses, right? Because to me, paying $600, $500, $400 a month to, if I'm healthy, use it 4 times a year and might spend $600
Right.
is just horrible math. So I'm like, why don't I just take that same $600 if I'm really itching to spend $600 on insurance, put it in a bank account, and that is my spending, my health plan, right? So it's available. It always depends on how much you made the year before, and it's not any different than like marketplace insurance, right? It's probably a little more
Gotcha.
expensive than like your large companies that have 70, 80, 100,000 employees. So they
Right. Because
have
it's a bigger
their
pool. It's more
it's a bigger
subsidized. I
pool,
get it.
but outside, like, it's not much different than your marketplace. Like, it literally is not. So I don't know what benefit really would be given to a driver. You know what I mean? Like, even though I get that Uber's thrown so much money at this, right? Like, even from if we're just being practical about, let's say it passes, and or Prop 22 is AB5 goes into effect and Prop 22 does not pass,
Right.
and they have to turn everybody in California to employees. That will take so long, so long,
Oh, it'll be a
because
nightmare.
I mean, I can't remember if it's 70,000 drivers. So I don't know the number. If we can Google and find out, and maybe you can throw it up there later. But like, how
Definitely.
many drivers there are in California? You even if it was 10,000 drivers, I know that's not the number. Try firing 10,000 people or reclassifying them as an employee, and then having them all fill out the paperwork, even if we did it digitally, and then building scheduling around the dynamic idea of people requesting rides as they need them.
Oh, no, for sure.
If if I were the business owner trying to do that, I want no parts of that. Like, that is mind-boggling. And again, for what benefit? Like, even if it's lip service and they're saying they want to help the driver, what would you be helping the driver do by doing that? Like giving them access to insurance they already have access to, giving them PTO. I said this in my comment on your first video. People are concerned about having paid time off. I think that's just a social construct we've been given of, oh, I want to be paid for my time off. How do I pay for my time off? Because I have control of my time. If I know I'm going to take a week off, I just go hard 1 week and I make 2 weeks worth in a week. It's possible. And then I take the next week off, because at the end of the day, it's all about the numbers, right?
Right.
Like, so I'm about to be off next week anyway. So just go hard this week. I have 12 hours in a day that I can work, like, through without having to take some time off, because that's how it's built. You have 12 hours in a day to drive without taking and then you have to take a 6 hour break before you can log on again. So every day I have 12 hours. If I really want that much time off, I just schedule my time that way. And honestly, just schedule your finances that way, right? Like,
Oh, of course.
just just I think that is the bigger, kind of like you said earlier about putting a band-aid on like a cancerous disease. Basically, it feels like trying to, the root cause here is like us not really, as a society, not understanding how finances work, or how to plan with our money, and for me, another reason I wouldn't want to do it, going back to finances, is it's not how much money you make, it's how much you keep. And for me to keep the same amount of money that I do driving Uber, I would probably have to get a job that pays about 100, minimum $90,000 a year, minimum, after taxes, for it to match. Because as a W-2 employee, I can't write off the same things I can as a 1099 independent contractor. So I don't know many $90,000 a year jobs where you can make your own schedule 100%.
Oh, 100, yeah, 100% agreed. So, just as a general question, so just so everyone's clear, first of all, to answer your question about California drivers, Uber apparently has 200,000 in the state of California. So, yeah, even more of a nightmare than you were thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then also, so everyone's clear, the average wages per hour driver for a ride share right now is about $12 per hour, whereas the average for a traditional taxi is about $30 per hour. So when he's talking about how much he's making, what you're making basically what a traditional taxi driver would make, which is great. So that's pretty awesome. Just so that everyone has like a general idea of, when we're talking about this. And if you live in a more expensive place like California, like I do, keep in mind that these numbers that he's talking about are really, really good pays for those areas, because I know growing up, for me as an example, you know, working like 18, like I was making about $18 per hour when I was working at UPS. And with that, paying for my housing, paying for my food, my car, everything. In the time that I was in school, I saved like $40,000,
Mhm.
so this is really good. He's doing a great job. Just wanted to point that out. Yeah,
I think so. Again, a thing to think about with going back to those numbers when they give you that average per hour. There's a couple things to think about. The drivers that are doing this, again, there's a swath of full time and part time, and they're just taking the aggregate of all the number hours driven, right?
of course.
Or the income earned and or the revenue paid and divided by all the hours driven. But the two things to think about that is one, there's a large population of drivers, and this gets into like more the dynamics of being a successful driver, which this conversation isn't about per se. We'll just go sit at the airport and
Right.
you will rack up hours doing nothing, right? Like literally, I was at the airport maybe a week or two ago, and I dropped someone off, and I was in queue because it was high. I only go to the airport when it's busy. I had a guy literally pull up and was like, "Hey man, it's my first time driving in like months. Like, is it even worth it?" He's like, "I've been driving for like an hour and a half and I only made $6." I'm like, uh, first of all, yes, it's worth it. And I had to ask him, where were you? And where he told me he's coming from, well, of course you made $6. You were over in suburbia or like rural land, you know? And then you're going to come sit here now at the airport. Granted, it was a busy time, but you're going to sit here. I wouldn't be sitting here if I had only made $6, right? Like, but I could also tell he didn't know when and where to be. And that's all this game is knowing when to be and where to be at the same time.
For sure.
So like that number of $12 an hour is really misleading
Of
because I
course. Of
think
course.
if you were to talk to who would put the wear and tear, even if you're doing it part time, right?
I don't know.
Who would put wear? That's what I'm saying.
I
Who would put
agree.
wear and tear on their car for $12 an hour?
I
Like really,
agree.
like who would do it? Like I'm sure maybe a small population of people would do it just because, but anyone who's remotely financially astute would not do that,
Right.
right?
Oh,
Because
100%.
you can go get a warehouse job and make
That's
fifteen
just
dollars
what,
an hour,
yep, that was my plan.
right? Like so, the idea, like nothing about this really makes sense to me because, and going back to the beginning of our conversation when we talked about the game and how it's being played and understanding the rules, politics and money should definitely be separate. Got it.
Right.
They're not. They're not.
Of course not. And they're not
They're
gonna
not.
be. In in
And
our current system, it's impossible. We can
yeah,
only band-aid it so much.
and the reality is, even if I was in Uber shoes and I was the CEO, and I like to believe, like when I owned my personal chef business, I had employees. No matter what you were doing for me, I paid you $20 an hour minimum. So like because I understood like
Hell
livable
yeah.
wage, like no matter what you were doing, I don't care what event we were doing, wedding, an event, doesn't matter what it was. I was paying you at least $20 an hour because livable wage, and at least I can try to do my part,
A hundred
right?
percent agreed.
And with that being said, if I were in the CEO of Uber shoes, I would be doing the same thing because I know the game that is being played right now is if this plays out the way that AB5 is going, I'm going to lose. I think we had this conversation that we will lose California, which is your biggest economy,
Right.
like like one of the largest world economies,
Right. And
right?
the counter, which is my my position was there's no way they'll leave. Like they'll figure out a
Sure,
way. And
sure,
yes, it will most likely end up there will be some loss of jobs within
hmm
within those companies specifically.
hmm
Where those people go to work, who knows? Whether they are able to get their jobs or they end up being unemployed, which of course creates an even another problem. Um, but yeah, historically, the companies always threaten this. When California put in the higher emission standards for cars, they
sure,
threaten the same thing. California is the best state in the nation for car purchases.
sure,
The reality is California is the number fifth largest economy in the world
yeah,
compared with countries.
yeah,
That's
yep,
like so.
yeah,
Now, yes, there will definitely be collateral damage, no question, and that sucks, and that's a real problem. And that also comes to the issue of California not having reasonable housing prices that ends up making unemployment such a big, like, life-threatening situation for people
Sure,
in California. But that's a
sure.
completely different issue. Like,
It is. I mean, but I think I think the whole conversation, like, obviously we don't have years to talk about this, right? But
right.
like, we do somewhat of a disservice by not at least including those parts of the, like, California's cost of living. One is a part that is huge in the whole equation, right? Because even if you're making $25 an hour in California,
You're
that's
scraping by.
still
You're
there's
not going to buy
still
it.
yeah.
You're not going to buy a house until you retire. Like that, you would
So
take you that long to save up.
like that by itself is an issue, right? But we can't fix that problem. We can't. That's not what this is about. Like the Prop 22 and AB5. That's not what this is about.
Right.
But when I think about it, again, going back to if I were in their shoes, I would do the same thing. I would throw money at it because I know this is how the game is played right now. And so, in order for me to win this game, I better play by how the rules are written now.
Oh, I
And
agree. I
if I
Yeah, while I don't personally agree, with
sure,
people like Bezos as an example,
sure,
or like, let's just throw a boogeyman out there of like the Koch brothers, right? I don't personally think that they are
yeah,
people that I would want to hang out with, but I don't think that they are inherently evil people because of the
sure,
fact that they are using lobbying money.
yep,
That's just the way the system is, and I think it's the responsive in football. I don't get mad at a person for cheating. I get mad at the ref for not calling it. It's the role of
sure.
the government and the system to make sure that those problems are fixed. But the reality is, if we have incentives in society right now, people are going to respond to them. And yeah, I 100% agree.
And using the football analogy, right? Like in this situation, they're not cheating. Like
Right. Which is the
it is,
problem. But yes,
and they're not cheating. They're playing the game literally by the law, right? That's why they have swaths and huge teams of legal attorneys to cover themselves while they do it. And I guess I see the morality, I guess, behind this, the morality argument of you know let's keep money out of politics. Let's just be pure about it. let's let's be real about where we are,
oh, I
and
agree.
let's
I agree.
and
You
and
can't
I'm
you can't keep money out of politics in a capitalist based system. It is not possible. Inherently, in especially in a capitalist based system, the people with more money are going to have more power, and they are going to be able to use that power, whether it's economic or political. It's just
because it
reality.
because at the end of the day, it's not even about money. It's just influence, right? And money just
Right.
happens to be the currency of influence.
Correct.
And
In today, yes. In
yeah, and
feudalism,
today,
it was divine
like
right, but it's the same
yeah,
thing. Yes.
today it's just money just happens to be the currency of influence. And so when we're trying to influence decisions that are being made, again, going back to being a driver, what is best for the driver is allowing them to earn on their time, right? Because we know it can work, right? Like, I guess for me, the question would be, you know, what I guess I also, from the beginning, I said to be success, and I think you and I actually had this conversation offline. To be successful as a Uber driver, whether you're doing it part time or full time, you have to treat it like a business, right? You have to. Otherwise, it is a losing game. You can do it part time and still be a winning game, but you have to treat it like a business. If we look at how many businesses typically fail, most, right? So
Yep.
we're just looking at the dynamics of economies playing out in this microcosm of rideshare. Like, there's so many businesses starting every day. Oh, I'm going to be an Uber driver, and I'm making $12 an hour. I'm still choosing to do it every day. I mean,
Agreed.
these are choices that are being made, right? And I think it's a hard pill to swallow, but the reality is, like, we have to. It works. It does. The solution isn't, from where I sit, isn't fixing the system per se for this, because we could change this and we will still have those same people who are starting their businesses and failing because A, they don't have the drive, or B, they don't have the know-how. And that's B is probably the more important one. They don't know the dynamics of how do I handle this like a business. And if we address that part first, which is a completely different philosophical conversation,
Agreed.
we're going to be here, which again goes back to why your channel is here. Like,
Exactly. And that's
it was,
yeah, I agree. Because, again, yeah, people, I'm well aware that we have that we have a very flawed system when it comes to outcomes for many people. Um,
Sure.
but as you said, that is a thing that we like as people have to work towards long term. The
Mm,
reality is right now, yeah, the best that we can do is make sure that we understand, basic finances so that we're able to not get screwed as hard. Um,
sure.
and that's the goal of this. If you enjoyed this clip, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and check out the full live version of the Wealth for 99 podcast, where we talk finance, economics, and public policy from a working class perspective. We'll see you there.